Have you ever looked at a man who seems ordinary on the surface, but somehow women orbit around him without him chasing anyone? And have you ever asked yourself one quiet, uncomfortable question? What is he doing that I am not? Not what he says, not how he looks, not how much money he makes, but what he does emotionally and without ever explaining it. Today I'm going to reveal one of the most misunderstood psychological tactics behind the so-called bad boy effect, and why it aligns disturbingly well with Machiavellian psychology. But listen carefully. This is not about becoming cruel. It's not about lying, and it's not about manipulating women into something they don't want. It's about understanding the emotional game that is already being played, whether you participate consciously or not. And if you stay with me until the end, you will understand why most nice men fail. Not because they are too kind, but because they are emotionally predictable. Before we begin, if you want deeper psychological content like this that can genuinely change the way you show up in your relationships, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and watch it till the end. Now, let me begin with the truth most dating advice never tells you. The lie you were taught about attraction. Most men are raised with a simple formula. Be respectful. Be supportive. Be emotionally available. Be consistent. Be honest. Be reassuring. And while all of those traits are valuable for a healthy long-term relationship, they are not what creates emotional pull. They maintain safety. They do not create emotional tension. And here is the first Machiavellian truth. People do not fall in love with comfort first. They fall in love with emotional significance. Machiavelli never spoke about romance, but he understood human nature better than most relationship experts today. He understood that people respond more strongly to uncertainty than to predictability. They respond more deeply to emotional contrast than to emotional flatness. They remember what unsettles them more than what pleases them. And bad boys unconsciously or not exploit this. So what is the dirty trick? The dirty trick is simple to describe, but extremely difficult to master. Here it is. They never emotionally resolve the woman's uncertainty about their availability. Not sexually. Emotionally. They never fully collapse the emotional tension. They leave one important psychological question unanswered. Where exactly do I stand with him? And this question is not created by mixed signals. It is created by emotional independence. There is a massive difference. Most men try to create attraction by giving more clarity. Bad boys create attraction by maintaining emotional autonomy. Let me explain. Why predictability kills emotional pull. Think about your own emotional history. Think about someone who meant a lot to you. Not the person who treated you perfectly. Not the person who always replied instantly. Not the person who constantly reassured you. The one who truly stayed in your mind was the person who had their own emotional gravity, their own direction, their own rhythm, their own priorities. They did not reorganize their emotional life around you. You were invited into their world. You were not placed at the center of it. This is exactly what Machiavelli understood about influence. Influence is not created by submission. It is created by position. An emotional position is what bad boys protect ruthlessly. The nice man's hidden mistake. Here is the painful pattern most good men fall into. They meet a woman they genuinely like. They immediately begin optimizing their emotional behavior around her reactions. They adjust their tone. They adjust their availability. They adjust their plans. They adjust their opinions. They adjust their emotional boundaries. They begin managing her comfort. They begin managing her uncertainty. They begin managing her emotional state. They become emotionally managerial, and this creates a subtle but powerful shift. Instead of being a grounded emotional presence, they become a responsive emotional service. Machiavelli would call this a loss of power. Not social power, psychological position. You become predictable, and predictability feels safe. But safety alone does not create emotional attachment. The bad boy's real advantage. Here's the part people misunderstand. Bad boys are not seductive because they are disrespectful. They are seductive because they are emotionally self-directed. They are internally oriented. They are not trying to be chosen. They are choosing. They do not rush to emotionally qualify themselves. They do not over-explain. They do not over-validate. They do not emotionally negotiate for space in her life. They simply occupy their own. This is the dirty trick. They do not collapse emotional uncertainty with reassurance. They allow emotional ambiguity to exist. And ambiguity activates the brain. The neuroscience of emotional fixation. When something is unresolved, your mind loops, it revisits, it analyzes, it imagines, it anticipates. This is how emotional attachment begins. Not with pleasure, with cognitive investment. Machiavelli understood this intuitively. A person who keeps others mentally engaged holds more influence than one who satisfies quickly and disappears psychologically. Most men rush to resolve the emotional story. Bad boys extend it. This is not manipulation. It is self-containment. Now let me be very clear. This only works when it is real. If you try to fake emotional distance, it becomes coldness. If you try to manufacture mystery, it becomes inconsistency. If you try to imitate indifference, it becomes insecurity. The real mechanism is emotional containment. You do not dump your emotional world into hers. You regulate it. You do not seek emotional validation. You already possess emotional grounding. This is why pretending to be a bad boy fails. Because women are not responding to cruelty. They are responding to emotional self-regulation. Machiavelli's central psychological rule. Machiavelli wrote one core truth that applies directly to attraction. People respect what cannot be controlled easily, not because they enjoy difficulty, but because difficulty signals value. When a man's emotional life is not easily rearranged, he becomes psychologically solid, and solidity is attractive. The invisible difference between leadership and dominance. Most men confuse emotional leadership with dominance. Dominance tries to impose. Leadership holds direction. A bad boy does not dominate the woman emotionally. He leads his own emotional life so well that she experiences him as anchored. When conflict appears, he does not panic. When uncertainty appears, he does not rush to fix it. When she pulls back, he does not chase emotionally. He remains present, but not reactive. This is one of the hardest emotional disciplines for men. The dirty trick in real life. Here is how this shows up in subtle moments. You express something honest. She responds emotionally. The nice man immediately tries to soften the moment. He reassures. He clarifies. He overcorrects. He smooths. The emotionally grounded man allows the moment to breathe. He listens. He responds cleanly. But he does not rush to emotionally stabilize her. He trusts emotional discomfort. And this is powerful, because most people are terrified of emotional discomfort. Machiavelli would say, whoever can remain steady while others wobble, holds the emotional high ground. Why emotional steadiness feels intoxicating. Most modern relationships are emotionally chaotic. People are anxious, overthinking, hyper-communicating, overprocessing, constantly negotiating emotional safety. A man who can remain calm, not distant, but grounded, becomes emotionally rare. He becomes a reference point, not because he withholds affection, but because he does not bleed insecurity. The second layer of the trick. Here is where it becomes truly Machiavellian. Bad boys do not compete for emotional position. They never attempt to prove that they are more valuable than other men. They do not compare. They do not posture. They do not subtly attack rivals. They remain self-referential. This sends a powerful unconscious message. I am not in the market of approval. And paradoxically, this makes their approval more valuable. The emotional economy you never learned. Every relationship has an emotional economy. Attention, reassurance, availability, validation, time, energy. Most men overspend emotionally early. They flood. They overinvest before emotional structure is built. Bad boys pace. They allow emotional investment to grow symmetrically, not out of strategy, out of instinct. Machiavelli would call this resource management. The dangerous side of this tactic. Now let's be honest. This same emotional positioning can be abused. When a man uses emotional ambiguity to manipulate trauma, to create dependency, to create anxiety, loops, to maintain control, that is no longer emotional leadership. That is psychological exploitation. The difference is intention. The healthy version of this behavior is rooted in self-respect. The unhealthy version is rooted in hunger for power. You must understand this line. If you cross it, you will eventually destroy the very trust that makes emotional connection meaningful. Why most men cannot apply this. Here is the uncomfortable reason. Most men are emotionally starving. They seek connection to regulate their emotional state. They seek relationships to stabilize their self-worth. They seek romantic interest to confirm their identity, so they cannot afford emotional independence because they are using women as emotional infrastructure. Bad boys do not need emotional scaffolding. They have emotional architecture. This is the part nobody wants to work on. The real work is not dating tactics. The real work is internal. Can you sit in emotional uncertainty without reaching for reassurance? Can you hold attraction without trying to lock it down immediately? Can you enjoy connection without turning it into emotional dependency? Can you tolerate not being constantly validated? This is what creates emotional gravity, not lines, not techniques, not scripts. Why women feel safe opening emotionally to these men. Here is a paradox. Men who do not emotionally chase often become the men women feel safest opening up to. Why? Because emotional containment is stabilizing. When you do not collapse under emotional intensity, when you do not rush to rescue, when you do not become overwhelmed by her emotions, she experiences you as emotionally capable, not emotionally impressive, emotionally capable. This is deeply attractive. The Machiavellian layer most people miss. Machiavelli never advised chaos. He advised control. But control of self first. Bad boys who truly succeed long-term are not impulsive. They are disciplined. They choose when to invest emotionally. They choose when to withdraw. They choose when to speak. They choose when to remain silent. And silence, when rooted in clarity, becomes powerful. The moment attraction collapses when a man hands over emotional authority. When his emotional state becomes dependent on her mood. When her attention becomes his emotional fuel. When her validation becomes his compass. From that moment, he is no longer leading his emotional life. He is following her emotional weather. This is not masculine. This is unstable, and women feel it immediately. The brutal truth about emotional polarity: attraction requires polarity, not gender roles, not dominance, not control. Polarity is created when two emotionally complete individuals interact, without collapsing into one emotional organism. The dirty trick is simply refusing to emotionally merge too early. Bad boys do not fuse. They connect. There is a massive difference. You don't need to become colder. You need to become clearer. Clear about your values. Clear about your standards. Clear about your boundaries. Clear about your direction. Clear about your emotional limits. Clarity creates calm. Calm creates depth. Depth creates attraction. The test you will inevitably face. At some point, a woman will emotionally test your center, not consciously. Emotionally, she will pull back. She will challenge. She will express uncertainty. She will fluctuate, not to manipulate you, but to feel your emotional stability. This is human. If you panic, you fail. If you emotionally perform, you fail. If you remain present, grounded, and honest, without chasing emotional reassurance, you pass. The difference between distance and dignity: distance is avoidance, dignity is self-respect. Bad boys are often misinterpreted as distant, but the men who truly attract consistently are not emotionally unavailable. They are emotionally selective. They do not open their emotional world to anyone who walks in. This creates psychological value. Your emotional posture shapes her emotional experience. This is the final psychological mechanism. People unconsciously mirror emotional posture. If you are anxious, the relationship becomes anxious. If you are reactive, the relationship becomes reactive. If you are grounded, the relationship becomes grounded. Bad boys set emotional tone without announcing it. This is leadership. The real dirty trick in one sentence. Let me compress everything into one sentence. Bad boys seduce not by what they give, but by what they do not emotionally surrender. They do not surrender self-direction. They do not surrender emotional authority. They do not surrender internal stability. They offer connection, not emotional control. Your challenge after this video: stop trying to be impressive. Start becoming emotionally anchored. Stop trying to be chosen. Start choosing how you invest. Stop trying to stabilize emotions that are not yours to regulate. Start stabilizing your own. This is the Machiavellian path. Not cruelty, not manipulation, not games. Self-command. Here's the final psychological truth you must understand. This fantasy people talk about, it is not sexual at its core. Sex is only the surface expression. What actually creates desire happens before touch, before words, before intention. It begins with emotional safety. A woman does not open through lust. She opens through grounding, through the feeling that she can exhale around you, that she doesn't need to perform, that she doesn't need to impress, that she doesn't need to guard herself. That is why this attraction is emotional first, psychological first, energetic first. If the emotional ground is unstable, physical desire burns fast and dies fast. That's why some connections feel intense for a week and empty by the third conversation. There was no emotional container, no inner stillness, no psychological safety. But when emotional grounding exists, desire doesn't rush. It settles. It grows quietly, slowly, powerfully. It becomes deeper, heavier, more intoxicating with time, because it's no longer driven by novelty. It's driven by presence. This is why chasing attraction never works. Chasing always communicates something beneath the words. It signals inner emptiness, urgency, need, and here's the part most men don't realize. The nervous system reads this instantly, long before logic or language gets involved. That subtle tension, that pressure to be liked, that quiet hope for validation, it's felt. But when you truly understand this truth, something fundamental shifts. You stop trying to be impressive because you no longer need approval. You stop forcing chemistry because you understand chemistry can't be manufactured. You stop leaning emotionally because you are no longer afraid of silence or distance. Instead, you become the emotional environment. Calm, not passive. Grounded, not rigid. Unrushed, not indifferent. Self-contained, not closed. Your presence stops asking and starts allowing. And when that happens, attraction no longer needs to be chased. It doesn't need persuasion. It doesn't need tactics. It begins to form naturally in your presence. Because desire doesn't grow under pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Desire grows where there is safety, space, emotional steadiness. And the man who provides that environment never has to chase attraction again. And with that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.